I'm Francis Seeley from Global Net 21. And I want to welcome you to this webinar today. This is one of the regular webinars we do. We try to do them weekly, which looks at a number of issues that we face in the 21st century. Now, we've done several already, and we're doing more on the whole area of community dialogue. How in a conflicting society where there's a lot of deep feelings about things and anger sometimes, how do you bring people together? And we've done it in sort of community dialogue, how community groups get together. We're going to do it in other ways as well. But there are some other interesting ways in which people bring people together. One is through social enterprise and developing businesses. Another is through art and theatre. And one, which is widely used and probably very successful, but we don't think of it as a sort of community dialogue exercise, but it is, and that's sport. And that's what we're going to look at today through a group called SportInspired. And they have used sport, obviously, to interest young people in sport, but also to bring them together from different backgrounds. You can see the people we've got on at the moment. We've got Lydia here, Lydia Borisova, who is from SportInspired, and Richard Rains, who is also from SportInspired, and they're going to talk to us about it. You can see Pong as well, down in the right-hand corner, who will help ask questions when the two presenters have done their presentation. Okay, so let's start then, and we'll go through the work that they do and how they engage people, and then please, as I said, put your questions and comments up as they speak, and also afterwards where they'll answer your questions and we'll go into a general discussion. And we may even, if there's a few of us, anybody wants to come on video and ask a question near the end, we'll put your hand up, which you can do, and we'll try and bring you on video as well. Anyhow, I think, Lydia, it's going to be over to you to start with. So let me pass over to you, and you can start with your presentation.
Thank you, Francis. Hello, everyone. We're very excited today to be able to present to you the work that we do using sport as a community connector and as a way to deliver social change. And we're also very excited to share some of the approaches and principles that we've seen work, both through our own experience as well as through the research that we have done. I'd like to first introduce myself and Rich, and so I will put on the presentation that we're doing, and we have a slide on the both of us. Rich, do you want to go on and present yourself, and then I will do that for myself as well.
Sure. So my name is Richard Rains. I'm the CEO and founder of SportInspired. It's this month been a 10-year journey since the community experiment in 2007. And it's a complete privilege to do what we do.
Thanks, Rich. My name is Lydia Borisova. I'm the development director for SportInspired. I joined the organization about 8 months ago, going on a discovery journey myself. I used to work in public affairs and consult large companies on managing social issues that affected their reputation. And that's how I got interested in the way that I could get closer to the change that I was creating, and work with an organization that works at grassroots level to deliver the social change that we're trying to deliver. I'm going to pass to Richard now to tell a little story about how SportInspired started and why connecting communities is so important to us.
So the background to SportInspired was a community experiment in a field in Hackney, the same field that I'd been working for 3 years with my kids' rugby club, the Shoreditch Sharks, which I helped to found. Every week, some of Hackney's roughest, toughest kids would turn up and would learn discipline and respect and self-belief and teamwork. And the sort of stuff we want for all of our kids. But these were literally some of the kids that were very likely to go on to get in trouble with the police if they weren't already. Some of them almost certainly end up in prison. And I could see my kids' rugby club was having a profound effect on them as individuals. I could also see it helping to create community around the club in terms of the parents getting involved and learning their own self-belief through their involvement in the club. But there was two things that drove me nuts. One was that I kept meeting kids that said, if you don't play football, there's no sport for you locally, which is completely crazy because every sport you've ever heard of is a stone's throw away in Hackney. And I also couldn't believe the lack of connection between sports clubs and schools, particularly, and other community groups, councils, and businesses, and so on. And the very first festival was a very crude reaction to that. We thought if we invite the kids, we invite the sports clubs, the kids will try the sports and they'll all find a sport they enjoy and the world will be safe. And it was incredibly naive, very simplistic, but that was the idea. What that did do was led to the very first, the festival and the first model of sorry, excuse me, there's really bad feedback in my ear, that's better. Led to the very first sustainable model that it became. We'll talk about that later. I think one quick anecdote which really underpinned the power of grassroots sport and the need for connecting kids with locally available clubs. There was a kid called Joe that played for the Shoreditch Sharks. He was actually sectioned under the Mental Health Act. He had bipolar. He was seen as a danger to society. And was actually locked up. And he'd been playing for the Sharks for a couple of years at this stage. And I knew Joe could be dangerous. And I also knew that his love for rugby and playing for the Shoreditch Sharks was a powerful force for getting Joe to battle with his demons. And I saw him in the Young People's Mental Health Institute. And I just told him, I said, look, if you want to get back playing rugby, you need to get on top of what's going on with this and get yourself fit again. And he got out 3 weeks later and he got back playing for the Sharks. And for the kids like Joe that are out there, but even kids that just have small problems and a variety of challenges that as we all do, it was a huge lesson of how powerful sport can be to help change people's lives. So background to SportInspired, you know how we started, what we've done since, and who we are as a charity today. We are award winning. We have a London Sport Awards. We also have award for having the best corporate involvement in communities. The partner that we work with since the very first sustainable one in 2008 is UBS. And we work with them to engage their staff in the community, connect UBS as a business to Hackney, again, in that same park in Shoreditch, and be a platform for social change. We have delivered, as you can see the numbers there, over 300 programs, 31 communities, 60,000 primary school pupils, and young leaders have become an incredibly important part of the model as well. And of course, the business volunteers that have been part of it since that first one in 2008. The other partner you can see mentioned is Barking Dagenham, the second key driver of social change using our model became councils. And we actually work in every school across Barking and Dagenham, sponsored by the council to do so.
Thank you, Rich. I think one of the key things that it's important to take away from this is how SportInspired went from a social experiment that was informed by a lack of connectivity between sports clubs and schools to begin with, in getting kids to play sport and connecting the community in that way, to an organization that spans the entire country. That has extremely valuable experience in delivering changes in attitude towards sports, sustainable connections within communities, and changes in behavior, both from a youth development perspective and also from a physical activity perspective. And I think one of the key things for us to talk about is this concept of community cohesion. It was a concept that was actually developed in the UK in the early 2000s, in 2001, following a a few riots in the country, and it was this idea that it's important for a community to be cohesive as a way to solve challenges that are coming from disconnected communities, from communities that are almost living parallel lives, whether that's based on ethnicity or religious differences or differences in economic status. So they defined a cohesive community as one that has some of the following qualities: a common vision, a sense of belonging, diversity being appreciated, similar life opportunities, doesn't matter what your background is, strong and positive relationships, a feeling of shared contribution toward a future vision, and then focus on individual rights and responsibilities within that community. Funnily enough, and as you will see throughout our presentation, a lot of these things tend to be some of the defining factors around the success that SportInspired has in the way that we deliver games, both from the inclusivity of our programs, both from the point of view of disabled and able children, as well as ethnic backgrounds, whether they're overweight or not, etc. That creates a shared common purpose amongst these children and the community around that, in lifting them up and helping to develop their skills and getting them physically active sustainably. And I think within the current situation that we're in, and the interest of the people that are watching this webinar, community cohesion as a concept is arguably even more important nowadays, with issues such as Brexit and radicalization and social exclusion being seen as being able to be solved by community cohesion, and then the growing inequalities that we have in our communities, both from a health inequality perspective and a deprivation perspective. And not just because of our name. We know that sport is a powerful way of delivering on social and community cohesion, and on helping to solve issues. And there is so much evidence out there around the various powers of sport in delivering that. And I think here it's important for us to define what we mean by sport, and that's not just elite sport and watching, the Olympics or various other competitions. They're a good trigger of excitement and interest in the area, but actually we're talking about grassroots sports, about people taking part in physical activity on a regular basis within their community sports clubs, or just getting together with friends and kicking a ball around on a field that's available in their area, which are both things that are quite normal for us anyway around London when we're living our life. In terms of the effects that sport can have on the community and on social change, there is evidence, and our experience suggests that it can be a powerful tool in solving, one of them being obesity, which is a clear one because physical activity is very closely related to the ability to lose and manage your weight, but also increasing evidence around the value of sport in mental well-being. All of us know about the sport psychology in terms of the resilience that sport is able to build in athletes' minds, but that there is increasing evidence to suggest that regular physical activity is one of the key components in improving mental well-being. Skills development, learning new things through sport, is a core part of what SportInspired does, and youth development and employability is a core area of development for organizations when it comes to the use of sport. You can see that there are a number of stats that I've put on the right of this slide. Higher educational attainment, academic achievement are very highly related to physical activity and engaging in PE. Obviously, from a social exclusion and integration perspective, the statistics are also very clear. From an antisocial behavior, a number of sports scheme studies that were presented to Parliament in a report demonstrated that there was a 36% reduction in burglary compared to about 8% reduction without the sport intervention scheme, as well as 18% reduction in youth crime and offenses in high-risk areas. In addition, people who participate in sport are more likely to be connected to their community. So there's a 20% higher likelihood for participants in physical activity to know more people in their community, and 60% higher likelihood to believe that various neighborhoods can be trusted. And finally, sport is the single greatest contributor to social participation in the UK. And the volunteering angle of this is not just important to SportInspired because of the way that our partnerships, our programs are delivered and funded, but for the entire grassroots sports sector and the amount of volunteering time that is put into helping to deliver sport for the greater good and the social benefit. One of the ways that sports power can be harnessed in delivering social cohesion is through the so-called asset-based community development approach. This was an approach that was created a few years back in a seminal paper in 2010, I think it was issued. And the whole concept behind it, for those of you who are not as familiar with the asset-based community development approach, is the concept that you are considering a community as glass half full as opposed to glass half empty. So you're looking at the various skills, knowledge, connections, institutions, etc. within a community that can help solve a certain health or well-being problem, as opposed to looking at the deficiencies. And I think from our perspective, one of the core areas of how we apply this is to empower the community to be involved and in defining and delivering the programs that we provide, as opposed to be seen as recipients of a service that is being quote unquote done to them. The sustainability of the results from that point of view is much higher because the community can take ownership of the program delivery, even when an organization like SportInspired exits its active involvement in the community. It can also be upskilled in a way that allows it to almost bootstrap itself out from a development perspective and from a health perspective. We have also seen that creates a much higher efficiency of resource use when it comes to the way that we're able to take funding from a partner of ours, whether that's a council or a corporate partner, and make it go far or farther than if we were, going on the ground and delivering absolutely everything ourselves. I think Rich will talk a little bit more about how we approach the community asset question, but just to give a few examples of what we consider in our work as community assets. Those are the sports clubs, obviously, the connections that we create between sports clubs and schools, the connections that begin to be developed between the councils and the closer connections anyway, between the councils and the schools, or the housing associations and the local clubs and schools, that helps to accelerate these organizations' targets around health development, etc. So we wanted to share with you a few of the learnings that we've had in terms of the principles that work well from a sport for development perspective and using an ABCD influenced approach. I've divided those for the sake of clarity between kind of 3 levels of delivery. It's the creation and input stage of the program, it's the delivery and ownership part, and then it's the outputs and outcomes part. And from a creation and inputs perspective, what we found defines whether a program would work well or not so well is, first of all, having an understanding of the community and its needs. Going in there with an open mind and building the necessary connection in order to access the insight that you need, but also engaging the community in a way that allows you to understand where are the pain points, where are the barriers, what are the interests of the people that you will be involving, so that you are, as I said previously, empowering them, making them feel engaged and involved in the process, as opposed to just delivering something that they don't want to be part of. Managing for outcomes is a key point. Sport can be a very powerful platform for change generally, but the way that a program is developed, the way that the various community actors are involved would vary depending on the outcomes that you'd like to achieve. So a program that's tailored for obesity prevention would look differently than a program that's tailored towards mental well-being outcomes, would be different from a program whose sole purpose is to, develop a very close community cohesion within a community. Usually creating connections in the community helps to deliver on other outcomes as well. And then finally, the nature of the sporting experience. Obviously, team sports are an important community connector because it allows people to interact with other people that are perhaps from different walks of life, etc. There are certain sports that are more appropriate for different ethnic or other backgrounds. So for example, from an individual sport perspective, fencing has been seen to be very useful in engaging Muslim women because of the fact that it's a non-contact sport and because it allows them to remain covered and therefore makes them comfortable in participating in a more kind of group-based environment. From a delivery and ownership perspective, obviously I already mentioned the community ownership. It's very important for them to feel like you're empowering them to deliver on the results that you'd like. It's a multi-stakeholder collaboration. I think having as many stakeholders as possible in the way that you're creating and developing the program means that there will be a richness of experience and a richness of goals that informs the way that the program would be developed and put into place. We ourselves believe very strongly in this, and most programs that we bring together have a private or local authority component to them. They have a private or a corporate organization part to that, a public or local authority part to that, and the third sector part, including SportInspired, but also other charity and volunteer organizations. The role of the volunteers is critical, both in allowing us to deliver an efficiency on resources, as well as from a corporate volunteer perspective, interacting with the young people in providing positive role models and mentors that can help to elevate the skills development of the children. And then finally, the outputs and outcomes. So first of all, seeing sports clubs, community sports clubs as assets, but secondly, creating community assets ourselves by setting up sports clubs within the schools of the children that are engaged with us. And having a mindset in that way that sees all of these things as the potential for delivering community connection and social change. And then making sure that there is sustainability of efforts through the connections that we have created. Very quickly, I wanted to give you a few examples of some of the experiences from abroad that we've seen work well. The first one is Iceland, and it's an interesting one because this has been quite a useful and well documented experiment that the Icelandic government put into place a few years ago, and the way that it's changed the interaction that young people in Iceland have with various antisocial behavior. It's based on the studies of an American psychology researcher that looked at the way to how do you use positive experiences to get people to not engage in antisocial behavior. And in terms of the results that they have been able to deliver, in 25 years, Iceland has gone from, or in 20 years, Iceland has gone from teens being amongst the heaviest drinkers in Europe to lowering the percentage of young people who drank in the past few weeks from 42 to 5% in just 20 years. And then the percentage of children or young people who smoke cigarettes every day from 23% to just 3%. And Iceland's example is quite extreme because the way that the government approached things is to take a whole government, whole community approach. There was a curfew that was put on the children in terms of what was the period of time that they were allowed to go outside. There were surveys that were being run in each school with every young person in Iceland in terms of their behavior. The government rolled out these almost social contracts that parents signed with various, commitments that they had towards how they were going to engage with their children in a more positive way. And then finally, the government put quite a lot of funding behind free sports and free other recreational activities that the children could engage in. This program has now been rolled out across Europe, and it has had varying levels of success depending on the environment that it's been placed in. Obviously, from a UK perspective, and our learnings for this is sport can be a very powerful tool. and at the same time, individuals have a different relationship to government, to central organizations, and therefore such a extreme approach might not be as successful or useful in the UK. From a Commonwealth and South Africa perspective, one of the examples that I wanted to give was the fact that the Commonwealth Games, as a connector between varying levels of development in different countries that participate in them, have been quite a strong impetus for the use of sport for development. And for about 20 years, the heads of state in the Commonwealth, who were part of a sports relations committee, worked on having sport in the community become a much higher priority for the countries that were engaging in the Commonwealth Games. There was a very famous quote by the Prime Minister of Jamaica that said, in his view, sport represented the best hope of weaning young people from the horrific cycle of drugs and crime and providing a bridge back to the world of education. And then South Africa is an example of one of the Commonwealth countries that has embraced this use of sport in bridging divided communities. There has been a clear link between the use of team sports with allowing teachers and pupils to bridge their social distance and differences, for the teachers to create different links from a female versus male barrier perspective, and for children to widen the knowledge of each other and connect communities in that way. Finally, the French example actually doesn't relate as much about the use of sport in particular. Obviously, physical activity is a large part of it, but it's about the value of taking a whole community approach to solving a social issue. There was a program that was developed in France about a decade or so ago, even more, called the Pod, which is one of the few example of programs that have led to a successful staving off of the issue of obesity in the country. So whereas all other countries and communities that weren't involved in it the obesity kept rising, these guys were able to keep it level. And what this involved is an involvement from the point of view of the entire community surrounding the family unit as a way of influencing children's behavior and improving it. What this entailed was long-term planning and alignment between various actors in the community. We're talking supermarkets, media, obviously sports clubs, community organizations like ours, etc., to deliver the same message consistently for at least 3 months at a time, and to focus on reinforcing a positive change in behavior in that way. And this is an approach that we very much are embracing in our work in Barking and Dagenham, in our ability to change attitudes and behaviors through our reach within the community. I'm going to pass on to Rich now to talk about SportInspired's approach and how we put all of these general theories, evidence, and approaches into practice in our work. Rich, take it away.
So our core foundation at SportInspired, who we see ourselves as, is effectively a major community matchmaker. We're building relationships between different groups, different stakeholders that, in my opinion, really should have relationships, but often don't. Back in 2007, it was the lack of relationships between schools and sports clubs. Why was it so hard for me to get my kids' community rugby club well known in the local schools? And that's the ethos that we continue to this day. So our key stakeholders on a participants level, first of all, of course, we've got the primary school kids. We believe it's critical to get kids into sport when they're young, before they're set in their ways. We work with young leaders, usually secondary school kids, anyone from about 10 years up, in fact, but particularly 13, 14, when they are really sort of searching for who they are and what they're about, and they crave responsibility but often don't get it. And connecting those two groups already is very powerful. And then local sports clubs, obviously, we've talked about, and how do you get a relationship between business volunteers who often would love to be part of local sports clubs but don't have an original excuse or reason to go along in the first place, if it's something that a sport they're not currently practicing. Local council, critical stakeholder, when you can get, as we do in Barking and Dagenham, the local council that really believes in innovative solutions, that is willing to look at different models for bringing together schools and sports clubs. One of the driving reasons why we went from being a small partner in Barking and Dagenham to a major partner, because they really valued, the council valued our ability to connect them with local schools and build relationships for them that way. And finally, the most important thing for us is, how can we accelerate change? How can we help the councils and the housing associations that we work with who want to create change, have great intentions, have some good initiatives, but how can we help them to do it a lot faster? How can we help connect businesses to their communities that they want to do it? They want to give their staff opportunities in local communities. How can we ultimately empower the community through co-creation, through partnership in delivery, and make it so that all these relationships sing with each other? And so it's a little bit cliched, but we know our job is done when we're not needed, and the community has those relationships that are sustainable to continue that work.
One of the things that I wanted to add here is to lay out a little bit about how our programs actually work. And I think from our perspective, when you have this network of stakeholders that you've identified in the community, what we do is we come in and we act as what Rich calls the community matchmaker. So we identify the local schools that have an intense need of physical activity interventions that actually engage their students effectively. We get a secondary school to which these primary schools are feeder schools to, and we recruit young leaders from them so that they can act as role models to the children that we are engaging from the primary schools. And we train them to deliver sporting events, in essence. That allows us to improve their employability skills, confidence, leadership, etc. We work very closely in that creation stage with our business partners and with the community stakeholders that we've identified in order to set the parameters of the program that we'd be delivering. What kind of sports? How far should those sports clubs be from the school? How are we engaging the parents, etc. We then run what is the pinnacle of our programs, which is a multi-sport festival that is an organized frenzy of 200 children discovering locally available sports that are run by community sports clubs. And the young leaders are, champions running the entire event, supported by the business volunteers who act as role models and mentors to them. That gives the access to our business partners into the community and allows them to begin to build relationships. Some of them particularly are interested in the relationships with secondary schools so that they can use them as a little bit of a recruitment drive around the future involvement of these children and the businesses in the community. And then I think finally, afterwards, we leave sustainable changes. So after the festival is done, our job isn't done. The attitudes of the children and the young leaders have been changed. And what we do following that is we set up sports clubs in the schools so that the primary school children can continue to practice the local sport that they've discovered and fallen in love with. And the young leaders can start to transfer the skills that we've given them and the confidence that we've built in them into their real life. So we teach them how to interview better, CV writing skills, etc.
So Barking and Dagenham, as I said earlier, we now work with every school and sports club across the borough. We work with the council, we work with business as well, and we're about to be working with housing associations. So we've got literally the full model being flexed. The sort of outcomes we end up with, we have young leaders who are completely inspired about how they're helping the primary school kids that they remember being just a few years before, gaining key employability skills. You've got the Housing Association accelerating the work they do in partnership with the likes of UBS and other key partners that we're going to be working with, corporate partners. You've got the council that now is accelerating change, particularly taking on the obesity agenda. How can we get every kid in Barking and Dagenham physically active? That's what we're literally taking on. And what we end up with is a community that is currently one of the most deprived in the country. And we believe we can genuinely instill that self-belief in the kids, in the clubs, in the parents, that they can become another exciting London community that isn't just topping the obesity stats and the deprivation stats, and have because they're fiercely proud, and we can help them to have a community through grassroots sport that's something that everyone's really excited about.
Just to give two statistics from the work that we've been doing in Barking and Dagenham. Nearly 300 sports clubs in schools. In the past year alone, where we've reached the scale of working with all schools and all sports clubs, we've set up over 120 clubs. 75% of those have now become sustainable, with the school continuing to fund them beyond the initial period of funding by SportInspired, which demonstrates the sustainability of the connections that we're creating and the long-term change that we're wanting to deliver. Thank you.
Okay, I mean, there's not many questions come up, but I have a few. But I mean, Peter Feltham says that many sort of young warriors, I mean, soldiers, particularly if they've been injured in war, use sports as a way of creating community, of getting back, and of developing resilience. So presumably that's a similar model to yours.
Yes, and actually it's really interesting because there's certain sports that I think lend themselves better or have been used more. Boxing, for example, has been quite a popular one in terms of helping with mental resilience. And actually, I think it's Harry that talks about how boxing helped him to manage his mental state and the ability to kind of get over the shock of his mother's death in the years that followed. And I think the challenge with adults, and that's why we're taking on children first, is that they change their behavior slower, and it takes more effort and more support in order to do that.
And Helen asked, do you do any work in South Africa?
I don't think so. Rich, have we done any work in South Africa? No, we don't. I gave the South Africa example as an example of a place where good things are happening. But SportInspired does have a model that we think could be exported to other places. So if you're interested in talking to us about how to take our work to South Africa, please let us know.
We have actually done a little work in India before through UBS and their partners out there. And what we saw was that in countries that having a huge variety of sport is not so normal, having just some variety becomes forgive the cliche, a game changer in itself. So in India, I think India is pretty famous for its love of cricket and kabaddi, and we introduced a couple of different sports, and the one that was a massive success was badminton. And there, when it comes to legacy, setting up sustainable change, well, actually, you don't need a huge amount of infrastructure. What we learned there was a few badminton rackets and a few shuttlecocks, and they become the prized possession of the school because all the kids are so excited about using it. There is the sustainable change created.
One of the interesting things, we're talking here about, in terms of this webinar anyhow, about community dialogue, about community cohesion. You work with kids, you mentioned you involve their parents. Now, what's the feedback on the parents? Do you find as a result of what you do with kids, the parents get together across different divides? And do you help to encourage that? Have you got that as part of your model?
We currently find that engaging parents is the hardest part of what we're trying to do. And I can speak firstly from my experience of running my kids' rugby club. The power of the of a grassroots sports club does draw parents in. There's absolutely no question about it. And once they're in, so we have parents coming along regularly that had never been sporty in their life, that didn't engage generally outside of their own sort of personal existence. And the thing that really struck me is the club was based in Shoreditch in Hackney, North Shoreditch, where you've got some of the most deprived estates in the country and some more affluent ones side by side, and you literally had different classes that would never have a relationship working really effectively together. It was amazing to see. So when you can create that kind of commonality, and kids are such a powerful force for that, then it's possible to bring them together, for them to put aside that, oh, I would never speak to him, never speak to her, and form some really effective relationships.
It works really well, not just with the parents, but with the connections that are created between the business volunteers that we have and the children and people from more, I guess, deprived backgrounds. You know, we actually had a case where we had the CFO of one of our corporate partners step up and lead the street dance competition at one of our festivals. And you have this man who has such a powerful position on a daily basis, completely let go of his inhibitions and connect to the children and all of the adults that were there at a very kind of universal level. And I think one of the key things that people should probably take from this discussion is that sport is such a universal language, and it allows people to connect at a different level and to overcome various differences that exist.
So, oh, by the way, Pong, come in if you want at any point, but you talk about your volunteers, and your business volunteers are clearly an important part of your model. Do they connect with parents as well as children? And is that a bridge that crosses that divide as well?
We currently haven't done that, to be honest with you, but this gives a great idea. I mean, I think that there is the potential for us to integrate the way that the volunteers are involved in the programs, which is usually helping us to run them together with the young leaders, in the way that they engage with the parents. So using their volunteer time to help run some of the sports club sign-up drives that we run, as well as to explain their impressions from the day with the parents when they show up to the festival. So not currently, but there is potential, I think.
Okay, do you want to ask anything, Paul?
No, there is a lot of information. I just try to absorb it. It's I think I'm very interested in the relationships. But how do you start to build the relationship? You know, like you started 10 years ago, and it is not easy to make people, to connect people. Now I have assumed that it is getting better because you are known and you have few relationships already, and then it makes it easier for you to work. But 10 years ago, how did you start building relationship between schools and take the older kids to help the younger kids?
The absolute key is always having, value for everyone in what you're trying to do. If you unpick it a little bit, why do the schools bring the kids to the festivals? Because it's a bit of a no-brainer for them. They can see that it's likely to be a great experience for their kids when they've never been involved, and once they have been involved, they always come back, and that's because we work really hard to make sure. I think the key word is inclusive, that absolutely everyone gets value. So one thing we maybe haven't touched on, made quite as prominent as we should have done, is that, if you like, one of our core missions here, we're not trying to get sporty kids more sporty. We're happy if we achieve that as well. but it's not our core focus. Our core focus is connecting every kid with a sport they love. And so we actually have an enormous amount of success with kids that normally have no interest in sport. And so when every single person comes away from that festival having had fun and wanting to do it again, creating connections and ongoing relationships becomes easier and easier. In the early days, we were literally saying, this is what we're trying to do. Would you like to get involved? And some people said yes, and some people said no. Nowadays, we obviously have a pretty considerable track record. And so we do much less persuading and a lot more of, well, this is who we are. This is who we are. This is what we do. This is our track record. Would you like to get involved? And it becomes a lot easier. But at the end of the day, there's no major secret. It's really just a case of saying, look, this is what we do. If you'd like to get involved, brilliant. And if you don't, we understand. And then you take it from there.
I mean, you did say that trust was important, and clearly you do build up trust, and that's the essential element of the relationship. But the reason why I asked a question about parents is, right, you bring these kids together and they come from different backgrounds and different groups and different religions and cultures. And then they go back home to their parents. And how do you make sure that, they're not going back into the silos they came from, and then they come back to you and they go back to the silos? I mean, you talk about measuring outputs. Are your outputs in terms of, whether they're less obese and so on, or do you measure outputs in terms of how they mix together as communities? And does that going back to parents and coming to you, going back to parents coming to you, have an effect on that at all?
So our core measurement focuses around getting kids more active rather than around their weight. We do a little bit of that, but it's an incredibly sensitive area, and actually it's incredibly
well, I didn't mean, I just used weight as an example. What I meant is, I mean, how do you know community cohesion is working? In terms of your measurements and your outputs, you can see that they may like sports, but do you measure the outputs in terms of community cohesion? Do you have any evidence to show that communities are coming together?
We don't measure the cohesion side of it as an explicit stat in itself. What we know, I think, what you see around you is that when you have sports clubs, that they are an incredible melting pot. And so what you'll get is people from all kinds of cultures and backgrounds. And, I was mentioning about my own kids' rugby club that all come together. And what's key is that the kids will mix. Like, they have no issues with it. They don't see the barriers that adults see. And then when the kids are mixing, that then encourages the adults to mix when they wouldn't otherwise, as part of being a natural support to those kids. I think, if I could sort of put in a slightly different question there, Francis, in terms of how do we know that, we inspire kids and that they're then going to take up that sport, because some cultures are more supportive of that than others, and some cultures are more supportive of female participation, particularly than others, and this is where schools are key, because if we can get that inspiration translated into action, long-term behavior change in schools through running sports clubs at the schools, after school particularly, then we've got a shot of persuading parents that this is a good thing in their child's life, and encouraging that to become something that they're willing to do when they otherwise might not.
Okay, Fong, do you want to come in again?
Yes. So you are running sport club in the school, after school club. You are running sport, right?
Yeah, not us personally. It's the local sports providers that we engage to do that on our behalf. We're the asset-based community development, so it's the local assets that we want to empower.
Yes. So it's just so you build a relationship between the club with the schools.
Yeah.
And then how can you involve the older children from secondary school? How does the relationship work from secondary school to primary school?
So it's
and
a
the
great
sport clubs?
question. Yeah, it's a great question. So first of all, we create that connection through the festivals themselves. So the young leaders, the secondary school kids, are the team leaders, are the mentors, are the assistant sports coaches for the primary school kids that are trying those sports and hopefully being inspired to discover a sport they enjoy. In terms of then moving the model forwards, how we engage the young leaders then in the sports clubs afterwards is, and this is hard to do, right? You need a really engaged, supportive secondary school willing to make this work. But it is possible. And having those young leaders actually help the sports providers to run those sports clubs, or indeed, where they've got the qualifications to run the sports clubs for themselves is the key opportunity.
It's really good news. Sorry, Francis, just last questions. The qualification, who gives the qualification to the kids?
So there's a range of ways that the kids can get the qualifications. So some schools are brilliant at helping gain young leaders qualifications, and we are going to be doing that ourselves. And then in terms of sports coaching, the main way is through the sports clubs themselves. But again, some of the schools are now starting to do that as well.
There is a national body that provides sports leader qualification. So these are usually the qualifications that are needed for a young person starting at age 12, I believe, to be able to run sports as an event-based engagement.
You talk about resilience, or you did talk about resilience in your presentation and how it builds that resilience in the kids. Have you got any evidence that it also builds that community resilience as a result of what you do?
Wow, I wish, but no, we don't. I think from a resilience perspective, one of the key things that tailors itself to the way that we deliver our programs is the framework that was established by the coalition government and the NHS called the 5 Ways to Wellbeing, that uses physical activity as one of the key components to improve mental well-being. The other 4 are connecting, learning new skills, being mindful, and giving back. And if you incorporate all of these 5 things into a program, it would deliver sustainable changes in mental well-being. And the assumption here is that because there is connecting going on, there is giving back going on, and there is the sport component, that mental well-being and mental resilience that is improved will then translate itself into a community connection and resilience as a result of that. But one of the things that I'd be interested in exploring is, how do you even measure that? How do you measure community resilience?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point and an important question. We're getting to the end of the webinar now, but just one final point. That, I mean, what's interesting about what you do and what people who do in art and theatre and so on to get communities together is that when people are actually working on getting communities together, without using a means of doing it like sport or theatre, you often get the usual suspects in. But what you do by using sport, would you say, you go beyond those usual suspects and you get a lot more people in. So the impact you have is much broader, much wider.
Exactly.
Okay, I really answered your question by asking it, didn't I?
Well, I think that's correct, and I think one of the things that we are very good at is this efficiency of the use of resources. So one of our programs engages 200 primary school children at a time and uses 25 young leaders to help lead the program. So this means that within each of our programs we have 3 to 4 primary schools being engaged and 1 secondary school, in addition to 5 or 6 sports clubs, as well as a business involved in their community. This is a lot of connections already that are being created as a result of that.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go back then to the full screen view, and let me say thank you for doing that, both of you, Lydia and Richard. That was great, and it's good to know the work that you're doing. And I've known the Sports Inspired now for some time, and we've done things with you in the past, and I know the impact you have in the parts of London that you work, and I know that you're expanding and developing, and it's good that you expand out from sport into the community cohesion, and I notice even the job creation areas as well, which is good, and I think that's really important. So thank you for doing it, and thank you for those who attended for coming along. And as I said earlier, this will be recorded, and we'll send a link out to you and to everyone else who's expressed an interest, and quite a few people who are not on here have expressed a strong interest in this, so we'll make sure that they get that as well. So thanks for doing this, and we'll finish this webinar now.